Which head coaches have the most to prove this year, in your opinion? From Fort Collins, Colorado. Rick, thank you for the question. Regrettably, I have to inform you Colorado State will not be included in this segment, but I do have 4 names, and Mel Tucker's one of them, who was out there, albeit at Boulder a few years ago, but he was out there at Colorado. Mel Tucker, 2021, excellent year. Mel Tucker, 2021, Michigan State arrives. And the problem is they made him play 2022, and it was no bueno. And I think that Mel Tucker has a lot to prove. Therefore, in 2023, they were 5-7 last year. They had no run game. Secondary was very, very bad. They were, by the way, 111th in yards per game, in rush yards per game. That's how bad that rushing attack was. And this is 1 year removed from having Kenneth Walker, who, at least if you read my journal, was a Heisman finalist. He and Will Anderson were both Heisman finalists. They just had their invitations to New York lost in the mail the year before. It's a bad enough resume, but if you're looking on the screen, you can see what I'm talking about. If you're listening on podcast, you know how sometimes in college football we have these teams and they have bad years, but a lot of the losses are close. You know, the old one possession. What was your record in one possession games? You would think if you had a team that was really good, and then they all of a sudden dropped down to 5-7, they just had bad bounce of ball luck. We call it Bob luck around here. That is not the case. Michigan State had 7 losses, and 6 of them were by double digits. So the fact is they weren't close in a lot of games. And there is another reality that before I can finish the sentence, a lot of our friends from East Lansing love to yell, and there's a reason why they're yelling it, and that is their guy, Mel Tucker, one of the top 10 highest paid coaches in college football. Now, you should be proud that your athletic department had it in themselves collectively to delegate those kind of resources to attracting a head coach. Do you have the right head coach? I don't love to do the pancake approach and just flip-flop every year on head coaches, but man, it was a pretty radical drop-off this past year. And so it's not totally unfair to ask whether that 2021 season was a mirage, a product of just a really, really good haul in the portal, but it wasn't sustainable, kind of a sugar high. I don't think that's unfair. I'm not necessarily in the camp, though. I'm certainly not in the camp that's ready to sell on Mel Tucker. I'm not that at all. I'm just saying this is a bottom line business, and it's even more. It's like a double bold bottom line when you're making the kind of money he is. He gets that, obviously, but stands to reason Mel Tucker's got to lead this list. I think Brent Venables at Oklahoma's got to be on this list. I think that Brent Venables, kind of the same record. In fact, they were, 6-7? Jesse, were they 6-7 or 5-7? They were 6-7. Yeah, they went to a bowl game. So they were 6-7 last year at Oklahoma. What happened? That's the first thing. What happened? They had the worst record since 1998. They were sub 500 at Oklahoma for the first time this millennium. That's what happened. Now, why did it happen? Why did they start 3-0 and then finish losing 7 of their last 10? They had some injury concerns, but they also had attrition concerns. We went over this the other day when we did the Oklahoma Mood Tracker, which is available on the YouTube channel if you want to see it in its entirety. They lost their top 2 quarterbacks, and remember, this is a pretty unique circumstance. Lincoln Riley leaves, goes to USC. Back in the day, that just meant, okay, go find a new coach. These days, it means go find a new coach and try and fill the 37 holes of guys who followed him. Welcome to the transfer portal era. So they lose their top 2 quarterbacks. They lose their top running back, 4 of their top 5 pass catchers, 2 offensive linemen starters, a key backup, tight end number 1, tight end number 2. All these guys were gone. So on paper, you look and Oklahoma's got these highly rated recruiting classes, and you just think to yourself, because every preview magazine did, you think to yourself, oh, they'll be fine. I mean, after all, it's just the Big 12. They'll be fine. Well, the Big 12 was pretty good last year. Oklahoma was not. And the more alarming stat, as we've talked about also with Oklahoma, is defensively, they allowed 30-plus points in 7 games. They allowed 40-plus points in 3. They allowed 50-plus points in 2 games. Now, that's collectively. So I did not immediately dive in and find out how much of that was non-offensive in nature. Broad strokes purposes, it was an effort that left a lot to be desired defensively last year. And unlike Michigan State, and this is where you have a little ray of sunshine peek in, unlike Michigan State, Oklahoma was 0-5 in games decided by 7 or less. So they had the bad one-possession luck You just flip that stat, and obviously it's a much different season, which doesn't matter because the record is what the record was. But moving forward, it means we need degrees of changes. We don't need wholesale changes. And I still feel pretty strongly about the future of Oklahoma football. Now I've got a depressing quote to give you. The second quote from Jesse, already in the show tonight. Earlier today, when we were deciding which coaches we wanted to put in this segment, I said, I think Brent Pry should be in there, Virginia Tech. And here's what Jesse, young, exuberant, youthful, in his 20s Jesse said to me. I vaguely remember Virginia Tech being good in my lifetime. Now, if you're 47 years old out there, or like me, if you're 52, which Wikipedia says I am, because they keep me confused with the Outer Banks guy, if you're in your 40s or 50s, that is heresy. Because you can think in your mind it wasn't that long ago that Virginia Tech was a national title contender, right? Well, it's been a little while for the youths out there because it's been since 2011 they have one double-digit win season. So we've stacked some years of mediocrity at best in Blacksburg, and Brent Pry is the head coach there, for those unfamiliar, entering his second year. They were 3-8 last year. They only played 11 games. That was the worst record they've had since 1992. First-time head coach in Brent Pry. First year, I'm not dumping it all on him. There's a reason why he got hired. Program was largely in shambles to begin with. So it's not all on him in year one. But that doesn't mean there's not pressure on him. There's pressure on the program. He just happens to be the face of it. They were bad in one-possession games, 1-4. But also, they were bad offensively. I started to compile the major offensive statistics and what they ranked, and I realized eventually they were just 100th or worse in all of them. So there's a lot to fix there. And frankly, I don't know that we're there over the span of 1 year. They had 314 offensive yards per game last year. There are many teams out there that had more than that just passing yards per game. So it's an uncomfortable time. And it's also right in the midst of when the ACC has been wide open for someone to come in either alongside Clemson or behind Clemson. It's just been wide open. And it's not just Virginia Tech. Up until 5 minutes ago, Florida State has not held up their end of the bargain. Miami hasn't. Neither of the Virginia schools have. I think North Carolina could have done a lot better than they've done recently. So it's not just Virginia Tech. Young JP happens to remember Virginia Tech, that VT meaning something nationally, and it hasn't in a while. And you give me like 30 Christmas wishes this year. I'm sure on that list somewhere will be, please bring Virginia Tech back, Santa, please. What about Billy Napier at Florida? We did the mood tracker for Florida the other day. I'm not going to reference it. There were some videos that were generated off of our video. There was also a thread on a non-24/7 affiliated Florida message board where someone actually lobbied for me to become the AD down there because, in their words, I couldn't do worse than what's been done recently. I appreciate the vote of confidence. I really do. I think Scott Strickland's doing okay. So I'm not going to put my name in the hat for the Florida AD position, at least not right now. They were 6-7 last year at Florida. We saw it all the first 2 weeks, did we not? So they opened against Utah, and they won miraculously. Come from behind win down in the swamp. I thought it set the tone for a great season, at least college football-wise. But as for Florida, no, because 1 week later, Kentucky comes in there, and I'm not sure why I remember this the way I do. I'll tell you why I remember. I was at Alabama, Texas in week 2 last year, which was an 11 a.m. Central Time kickoff. So I had gone to the Bama, Texas game, gotten out of there, flown back to Nashville, and I was in a Publix parking garage downtown as that Florida-Kentucky game was ending. And I remember listening on the radio because I'd come straight from the airport. I had to get the essentials. And I'd come straight from the airport, and I remember so vividly the announcers talking about how Anthony Richardson has had such a subpar night, he doesn't even know where the ball's going. So you go from sky high, Richardson's a Heisman contender week 1 to is Steve Sachs playing quarterback for Florida in week 2? Google it, Jesse. And so it was the best of times and the worst of times, and we weren't even halfway through September. They finished 6-7, back-to-back, sub-500 seasons. First time that's happened at Florida since 78 and 79. Rumors came out in 77, just for reference out there. Jaden Rashada, that whole deal did not do Billy Napier any perceptional favors, and that is what it is. That's pretty much as it appears on the surface. The whole Napier's in trouble because he's losing coaches thing, not so much. We covered that at length on the show the other day. I thought a lot of that was blown out of proportion. I think a few things have been blown out of proportion, maybe like 20 or 30% more than they should, just because he's vulnerable right now, just because it's kind of popular to attack Billy Napier, and it's not necessary. Look, if I'm going to talk critically about him, I'll just talk about tangible things. I'll talk about how they need to be better here, or there. And the reason I said in multiple areas, much as he will tell you himself, is because there are multiple areas they have to improve in. Recruiting's probably one of them. A more firm understanding of NIL is probably one of them. They have that in common with a lot of folks right now. It's a pretty Wild West, open landscape, brand new era in those fronts. So they don't have benefit of the doubt, is my point. If Napier had made it somewhere and gone and coached in the NFL and flamed out and he came back, if he were Matt Rule, if he came back to Florida or Nebraska in that case, Matt Rule will get benefit of the doubt. Billy Napier doesn't right now because for some reason, some people look at the success he had at Louisiana and say, well, that doesn't count because that's G5. Now, mind you, those same people, hypocritically, will walk up to me and say, G5 programs should have the same chance to win the same playoff that Power 5 programs should. Meanwhile, I'm over here lobbying, hey, can we make up our minds? Like, is this all one sport? Do we have 130 whatever teams, or do we have 60 over here and another 60 over there? Apparently, you can just take it however you want it, depending on how you're shaping an argument. I didn't know you could do that. It changes my outlook on life if I know that you can just wiggle your way in and out of arguments that way. So I would look at Mel Tucker, Brent Venables, Brent Pry, and Billy Napier. Not an exhaustive list. I say that only because every time we do some of these lists, someone pops down in the comments and says, what about so-and-so? And they're probably going to be right. That's why we only had room for 4 tonight, and that's why God invented the comment section.